My name is John Jenkins, and I'm going to be talking about the failure in the war on drugs. This failure can mostly be attributed to our policies not attending to those suffering from drug abuse, but rather policies that target drug supply, thereby making it harder for people to acquire drugs in the first place, and policy that try to discourage drug-related behavior. While these do seem practical, they prove to be rather counterproductive, as ever since the declaration on the war of drugs, very little has improved in regard to drug abuse in America. Instead, what has happened, the war on drugs has caused unnecessary human suffering by causing mass incarcerations and increasing violent crimes related to drug trafficking. Now, of course, every community in America is complex and diverse, different to each other, right? So a one-size-fits-all solution is not going to be very appropriate. But if implemented carefully, a solution focusing on harm reduction and government programs to help those suffering from drug abuse would be the best in addressing America's drug crisis. Following Nixon's declaration on the war on drugs, government policy tried to cease production of hard drugs by regulating chemicals that producers would use to produce substances like heroin, for example. But what ended up happening here was this production just shifted to South America, where crime organizations were able to synthesize and supply drugs more effectively than America had ever done before. And this is the balloon effect, where basically drug production shifts locations to avoid the law. This carries on to the next point, where that war on drugs has only locked up non-violent offenders, facilitated violent drug-related crime, and really has just done very little to reduce drug abuse. According to a report from the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, an estimated $100 billion is spent on drugs annually by consumers. Now, these consumers pursue narcotics as leisure, like for fun. They're not doing any crimes, they're non-violent offenders. Yet, we continue to pour countless resources every single year into putting these people to federal prisons, state prisons even too, which doesn't really do much to reduce drug abuse. The real crime being committed is drug trafficking organizations who use guns and violence to transport and facilitate the supply of drugs. But these organizations just only seem to grow. It's what we've been doing has not been efficient in taking down these organizations. So from this, reform is necessary in how we are addressing the drug crisis. And luckily for us, though, history provides several solutions. Of course, as I've mentioned previously, America is very complex, so there's no simple solution where, A will cause B. It's not like that. But with the options we do have, we can consider the extremes and then a moderate. So one extreme would be that we fully legalize drugs. Now, that's one option. The other extreme would be we continue our total wars, absolute prohibition. Anyone caught with drugs, selling drugs, distributing drugs, supplying drugs, they will just, be thrown in jail. Or we try a more moderate approach, somewhere in the middle, where we will be using harm reduction and initiating governmental programs to focus on reducing the harm that drugs cause in those who abuse drugs. So the Dutch has tried full legalization of drugs, and that was with marijuana. What they did, they made available for specific coffee shops to be able to distribute marijuana. And they could only distribute a certain amount, but within the next 10 years, those locations had increased by tenfold. Now, this will not be very applicable to the US, as our issue in particular is drug abuse, and increasing the availability of drugs does nothing to address the actual issues of drug abuse. Like, okay, they have more access to it, but they will continue to abuse the drug and engage in self-harm. What could be more applicable to us would be what occurred in Switzerland, where there was a huge opiate crisis. So what the government ended up doing was they installed heroin maintenance clinics. So these are basically rehab centers where the government would provide addicts with high-grade heroin as well as safe injecting locations and just being welcoming to their patients. By the end of this program, drug-related crime amongst the drug abusers had reduced significantly, and they all permanent jobs amongst them rose from 14% to 32%, and unemployment rates were halved. Ultimately, the war on drugs has negatively affected many human lives, whereby instead of solving the drug crisis, has just led to mass incarceration and facilitated violent organized crime. In this, it is evident that our approach on drug use is rather unhelpful, and instead of considering drug use as a crime, we should instead be considering it a public health issue where reforms to the current system are necessary to reduce human suffering. Thank you for your time.